Yeah. Tune in with concentration as we resume the conversation. The loftiest thoughts conceivable for human contemplation. Trying to search the mysteries of the divine is real deep. And when it comes to the nature of God, at times we still sleep. We must rest. People tuning us out as we discuss this. The topic on the table for reflection, God's justice. The scriptures are clear. Salvation belongs to God alone. And that righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. He's the priceless given treasure. All life exists for his pleasure. And he is the standard by which all righteousness should be measured. All human judges fail. No need to share the statistics. But God judges perfectly due to his characteristics. First, he's omniscient, so he never lacks information. Secondly, his understanding, it has no limitations. And plus, he knows the thoughts and all the motives behind them. And no one could ever go hide in a place where the sovereign Lord cannot find them. Passing the sentence, he has the power of execution.
How you guys doing today? Jason A. Kuhn here, giving you a Fight the Deception with Christian Perception news brief for March 7th, 2014. We got a lot of news today with a little time. We'll jump into it here at MrConservative.com. Breaking: Obama sends military reinforcements to Ukraine. Is this the beginning of World War III? Wow. As Putin threatens to change the world map, Obama has been forced to take military action in the name of, wait for it, the Ukraine Constitution. According to a recent statement, the stated department describes that Putin's call to steal land from Ukraine, quote, violates the Ukrainian Constitution and violates international law, unquote. This coming from the man that tramples on the Constitution of the nation in which he serves. Rich, how is the world supposed to take Obama seriously while claiming to protect a nation's Constitution, but strives to destroy and rewrite his own on a daily basis? Obama could care less, however, and has also stated that, quote, we are well beyond the days when borders can be redrawn over the heads of Democratic leaders, unquote. In making his statement public, Obama has sent over a whopping 6 F-15 fighter jets to Ukraine with 2 K-5 or K-135 refueling tankers this morning. Let's move on here. More Ukraine news at RT.com. Western backed PM pushes with Russian tanks in Ukraine fear-mongering. Mainstream media looks away. Wow. Ukraine's coup-imposed Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk is telling the world that Russian tanks are on the ground in his country. Meanwhile, mainstream media is turning a blind lie to this blatant falsehood. Western-backed Yatsenyuk had his minutes of fame as he addressed journalists like a Hollywood movie star in Brussels on Thursday after meeting with his European counterparts who acknowledge him as a legitimate representative of Ukraine. Feeling powerful while standing on stage answering questions amid EU flags, the leader went as far as fiction when he said, quote, having Russia boots on the ground and Russian tanks is unacceptable in the 21st century, and who knows the limits? Tell me, unquote. Speaking about foreign investment, he stated, quote, it would be very difficult to persuade foreign investors to invest in the country which has Russian tanks and Russian soldiers in its street, unquote. Surprisingly enough, the fear-mongering reference to tanks, which should have been deemed sensational and made the headlines around the world, was widely ignored and censored by Western media. The strongest quote and accusation towards Russia was left either unreported or edited with the word tanks replaced by troops or military. For instance, BBC tweeted while covering the event, quote, Russian troops on the ground in Ukraine, unacceptable in the 21st century, and military aggression, interim PM Yatsenyuk, choosing to ignore the tanks comment. Let's move on to more Ukraine news here at landdestroyer.blogspot.com. BBC now admits armed Nazi-led revolution in Kiev, Ukraine. Like the West's support of sectarian terrorists across the Middle East, including Al-Qaeda, it has found the most despicable elements in Ukrainian society to lead, quote, revolution for the socio-political reordering of Eastern Europe. As the dust settles and the West proxy regime finds itself safely entrenched in Kiev, Ukraine, the Western media can now finally recuperate some of its lost legitimacy after months of denying the obvious, that armed neo-Nazis led the so-called Euromaidan uprising. A BBC Newsnight short titled Neo-Nazi Threat in New Ukraine reveals xenophobic Jew-hating nationalists armed and leading the mobs in Kiev, directly contradicting months of Western media narratives portraying the rabble as aspiring for freedom, democracy, and, quote, closer ties with the West, with the most absurd example being the I am Ukrainian propaganda reel. Far from a pro-democracy uprising, the Euromaidan was just another case of Western-engineered regime change leveraging the good intentions of the ill-informed to mask the covert backing of ugly, armed extremists, just as it has done all across the similarly engineered Arab Spring in 2011. In light of the BBC's report, confirmed intercepted phone conversations between the EU and Estonia regarding the Ukrainian opposition's hiring of snipers deployed against both police and protesters take on a new degree of veracity with deepening implications. It also reframes U.S. Senator John McCain's taking to the stage in Kiev side by side with these overt Nazis as an abhorrent, shameful act bordering on treason and material support for terrorism. Wow. Let's move on here to Infowars.com, an article by Steve Watson, Ron Paul, U.S. attempting empire building in Ukraine. Former Congressman Ron Paul weighed in on the Ukrainian situation yesterday, warning that hostilities are rooted in empire building and vying for geopolitical control. Speaking with RT, which has itself become a focal point for Western criticism of Russia, the former congressman urged that it makes no sense for America to become entangled in the affairs of Ukraine. Quote, "I don't think we have any business there," Paul told anchor Liz Wall in one of her last interviews before she made headlines herself by resigning on air. Quote, "I think it would be nice if we considered the Ukrainians. It's their civil strike, their civil war, and deciding who to run that country should be left to them," Paul said. Quote, "Unfortunately, others get involved and it seems like it's irresistible for the U.S. to be involved." The renowned libertarian also noted that it is highly hypocritical for the U.S. to lecture Russia over violation of sovereignty. Quote, "America always wants their hands in things. They have an empire to build and defend, and I think it's a mess," unquote, the former congressman added. Paul also warned that Americans should be concerned about their government providing financial aid to Ukraine. Quote, "We are out of money. This idea that we are going to start bailing out Ukraine is total nonsense." Earlier this week, Secretary of State John Kerry pledged $1 billion in loan guarantees and technical support for the country's central bank and finance ministry. Let's move on here to Turcoplier.typepad.com, Sick Temper Tyrannus, the Ned at Work by Richard Sale. The National Endowment for Democracy, otherwise known as NED, was set up by President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and it employed an assortment of organizations across the political spectrum, including the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, to help funnel U.S. tax dollars to oversee groups working to develop democracy in their respective countries. In the 1980s, especially in Poland, the NED had proved an effective tool in loosening and weakening Soviet power by supporting Polish descendants. The NED was the chief pillar of a plan by the President Clinton to get rid of Serbian dictator Slobodan Milosevic. The plan developed by the CIA was intricate and comprehensive. Basically, it was to work through NED's two subordinate wings, the International Republican Institute, the IRI, and the National Democratic Institute, the NDI, as well as the Center for International Private Enterprise, as an offshoot of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The IRI would focus on dissident students, with the NDI would work closely with different opposition parties. The State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development would play the leading role in channeling funds through commercial contracts and nonprofit groups. Under the authority AID, other money would be funded to opposition groups and the mayor of opposition cities. Because of their freedom of travel and their ability to move in closed-off areas, the CIA recruited the staff of the NGOs, mainly relief agencies and human rights groups, which produced a great deal of useful intelligence. According to former CIA officials, such recruitment was done very selectively. "We didn't want the organization discredited or people killed, nor could they be seen as foreign vessels," unquote, said a former official of the agency's Directorate of Operations. Another agency official said, quote, "There was a lot of reluctance in this area," unquote. The proposed coup against Milosevic had to be, quote, "very tightly controlled from the beginning, middle, and end. You had to support one group against another group. You helped people who were going to help you," unquote, one said. Wow, let's move on here to news.yahoo.com. Western countries alarmed as Libya slides towards chaos. Western countries voiced concern on Thursday that tensions in Libya could slip out of control in the absence of a functioning political system, and they urged the government and rival factions to start talking. 2.5 years after the fall of former leader Muammar Gaddafi, the oil-rich North African state is struggling to contain violence between rival forces, with Islamist militants gaining an ever-stronger grip on the south of the country. Quote, "The situation in Libya is very worrying," unquote, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius told reporters on the margins of a conference in Rome to discuss the Libyan crisis. He said the uncertain security position, especially in the south, worsened an unstable political situation which required Libyan political forces to come together to reach a solution. Quote, "We are asking the Libyans to talk to each other and to find a stable solution," unquote, he said. The conference in Rome was overshadowed by the crisis in Ukraine, with a hectic round of bilateral talks at the margins culminating in a 40-minute meeting between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. But with violent disputes between rival tribal factions disrupting exports of Libyan oil, the lack of a stable political foundation is causing growing concern for energy-hungry Western countries, several of which were involved in overthrowing the Gaddafi government, including the United States, UK, and Britain. To move on here to the last article of the day, Infowars.com, an article by Kurt Nimmo. Senator Cruz calls for abolishing the IRS. Senator Ted Cruz told CPAC 2014 on Thursday the government needs to abolish the IRS. There should be a flat tax, he said. Americans could be able to file their taxes on a postcard. Cruz first called for a flat tax in 2013 as the IRS scandal picked up steam. Quote, "We ought to abolish the IRS and instead move to a simple flat tax," he said on Fox News. Quote, "Put down how much you earn, put down a deduction for charitable contributions, for home mortgage, and how much you owe. It ought to be just a simple one-page postcard," unquote. Mr. Cruz's proposal would not, however, be a true flat tax. Strictly speaking, a flat tax would eliminate all deductions, tax credits, and other tax brackets, including deductions for mortgages and charitable contributions. Under a pure flat tax system, only earned income will be taxed. Dividends, interest on savings, and capital gains would not be taxed. Republicans, including Tea Party Republicans, are unfortunately not philosophically opposed to taxation. Quote, "They have no problem taxing the American people to fund foreign aid, bloated defense budgets, U.S. military adventures around the world, the CIA, FBI, and anything related to law enforcement or homeland security, faith-based welfare programs, educational vouchers, abstinence education programs, farm subsidies, the space program, the war on drugs, and various conservative pork projects," unquote, writes Lawrence M. Vance. Instead of a flat tax, Senator Cruz and the Republicans should call for the 16th Amendment to be repealed. Could America exist without an income tax? The idea seems radical, yet in truth, America did just fine without a federal income tax for the first 126 years of its history. Prior to 1913, the government operated with revenues raised through tariffs, excise taxes, and property taxes without ever touching a worker's paycheck, unquote, writes Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman. That's all the news I got for you guys today. I don't want to leave you without the New World Order quote of the day. Quote, "At the old Inter-American office in the Commerce Building here in Roosevelt's time, as Assistant Secretary of State for Latin American Affairs under President Truman, as Chief Whip with Alday Stevenson and Tom Finletter at the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco, Nelson Rockefeller was in the forefront of the struggle to establish not only an American system of political and economic security, but a new world order," unquote. That's part of an article in the New York Times, November 1975. Of course, I don't want to leave you without the proverb of the day. This is Proverbs 3:5, King James only. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding." That's all the news, quotes, and articles I got for you guys today. I'll leave you off with the song I brought you in on. This is by Shai Linne, called "Judge of All Earth."
Revolutions, and he's in the position to smash us for our treason. Don't want to be copping, please, but God dispatches all his legions to execute the sentence. And resolute defendants who rejected the truth because they never knew repentance. And those who stood against the great I am and his anointed. God judges the nations through the men he has appointed.
Judge of all the earth, shall do right. Judge of all the earth, shall do right. He is good and his ways are just, worthy of our faith and trust. Singing, Judge of all the earth, Judge of all the earth, shall do right.
Yeah, as we continue to consider this particular perfection, let's take a second to address a few misconceptions. When many think of God, they assume his love is a must. That's true, but it doesn't negate the fact that God